The Wrath of Aconquija. The Aconquija Mountains, Tucumán, mid-1600s. The mist clings to the jagged peaks of the Andes, and the dense forest below hums with the ancient energy of untouched wilderness. Spanish conquistadors, driven by greed, have ventured deep into the region in search of silver mines rumored to be hidden in the mountains. Meanwhile, the native Diaguita people, who have lived in reverence to the mountains for centuries, remain wary of the growing threat of invasion. The mountain loomed over them, the craggy peaks shrouded in mist, and the air cold enough to cut through flesh. Lázaro Velázquez, captain of this cursed expedition, tightened his grip on his sword as he glanced at the fading path ahead. The men behind him grumbled, discontented, hungry, and unnerved. They had marched for days, pushing deeper into the Andes, each step taking them farther from the safety of the valley below.
"Captain, we should turn back,"
his second-in-command, Alonso, whispered. His voice shook, as if the air itself had weight.
"There's something wrong here."
Lázaro's eyes narrowed.
"Superstition. You let the Diaguita whisper in your ear. It's only a mountain. The riches are near. You'll thank me when we strike silver."
But even Lázaro could feel it. Something dark and ancient lived here. The trees whispered, their branches bowing under a weightless pressure, and the ground seemed to pulse beneath their boots. They had found no signs of silver, only a deep, unsettling quiet that followed them like a curse. The Diaguita guides, once steady companions, had disappeared in the night, leaving nothing but empty tents and footprints that vanished into the forest. But Lázaro was undeterred. Silver was his god now, and he would not leave the mountains empty-handed. As they ascended further, the forest thinned, and they came upon a series of stone altars, crumbling remnants of an ancient Diaguita shrine. Yupanqui, the last shaman of the mountains, had warned them before their departure.
"You do not belong in these mountains. The Aconquija sees. It judges. Turn back before you wake it from its slumber."
Lázaro had laughed then, but now the memory sent a chill down his spine. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and dark clouds began to roll over the peaks, swallowing the daylight. The men stopped in their tracks, the air so thick with tension that they barely dared to breathe.
"They say the mountains have a spirit,"
Alonso said quietly.
"a guardian that protects the land from those who would take from it. The Diaguita call it Aconquija."
Lázaro spat.
"Foolish tales."
But his bravado faltered when the ground beneath them trembled. Not the violent shaking of an earthquake, but a slow, deliberate pulse, as if something enormous was stirring deep within the earth. The trees groaned, their roots curling like fingers, and the mist seemed to press closer, a living thing. Suddenly one of the soldiers screamed, pointing ahead. A shadow moved through the fog, tall and monstrous, its outline barely visible. It was there and then gone, but the sight of it sent the men into panic. They dropped their weapons and ran, their footsteps swallowed by the forest.
"Lázaro, we have to leave!"
Alonso shouted, but the captain's gaze was fixed on the shadow. He could see it now, a hulking figure, its form shifting with the mist, its eyes glowing faintly with a light that was not of this world. It was the mountain, come alive, its spirit awakened by their greed. Before Lázaro could react, a violent wind tore through the trees, snapping branches and sending the men tumbling to the ground. The air was filled with the smell of earth and blood, as if the mountain itself was exhaling. One by one, the soldiers were dragged into the fog by unseen hands, their screams echoing through the forest until there was only silence. Lázaro stumbled to his feet, his sword raised uselessly. The figure approached, its presence suffocating. The ground cracked beneath its steps, the mountainside splitting open to reveal veins of silver, bright, shining, mocking him. But it was too late.
"You were warned,"
a voice whispered, not in his ear but in his mind. The voice was ancient, deep as the earth, and filled with a terrible rage.
"This land is not yours."
The figure raised its hand, and the earth beneath Lázaro's feet gave way. He fell, tumbling into the darkness below, swallowed by the mountain that he had dared to conquer. The last thing he saw before the earth closed around him was the silver, his silver, slipping from his grasp as the mountain spirit claimed its due. Days later, Yupanqui stood at the edge of the forest, watching the storm clouds roll away from the peaks. The air was still heavy, but the mountains had returned to their silent vigil. He whispered a prayer to Aconquija, thanking the spirit for protecting the land once more. The Spaniards would not return. The mountains had claimed them, as they had claimed so many before, and the spirit would continue to guard the Andes, punishing those who sought to defile its sacred ground. But Yupanqui knew that greed was a powerful thing, and though Aconquija had won this battle, more intruders would come, drawn by the promise of riches. The spirit's wrath would never rest.